critical reading, we said, well, what if the passage is boring? And if you remember, my response was, so what, right? So today we're talking about tough passages, and the first complaint I usually hear from students about a passage is that it's tough because it's boring. And that is not a valid argument, right? If a passage is boring, that's one thing, but boring does not imply difficult, right? So if you're feeling a passage is boring, we're going to need to come up with a game plan to keep you engaged, but it does not mean the passage is tough. The most common piece of advice I give students who say that a passage is boring and they can't pay attention is to break it up into smaller pieces. So do one paragraph at a time and just take a break, write a little paragraph summary. That'll keep you engaged. That'll keep you from sort of having your mind wandering while you're reading the passage. So the first tough passage complaint, that it's boring, is not a valid complaint. The second is that it is full of difficult vocabulary, and that is obviously going to be the case on some passages. We just don't understand what the words mean, so you can't divine the meaning. And I'll tell you one thing right now. If you don't know what words mean now, that is on practice tests, on the drills, chances are you're not going to know them on the actual SAT unless you study for them. So when you're reading difficult passages now and you're saying, wow, I don't know what this means, I don't know what this means, look those words up and make flashcards for them because you'll see them again. Sort of take advantage of the fact that difficult vocabulary is present and it makes passages tough while you still have time to prepare, right? Don't say, okay, I can't understand this, therefore this is a tough passage, therefore it's tough vocabulary, let me move on. Learn the words, and that's a really good study tip. Third is, a passage is difficult because the author's argument is arcane, abstruse, subtle, and this is obviously going to apply to a persuasive passage, right? An author with a subtle argument is difficult to understand, and that will be generally the most difficult passage in the entire test, right? So if your reading comprehension skills, your reading level is not sort of up to par, just be aware going into it that you're going to have to skip a lot of questions on this particular passage because this is a legitimately tough passage. We'll discuss different ways of breaking apart a passage so that you can understand an author's argument better, but a tough argument or a subtle argument is what sort of makes a passage legitimately difficult, and it's something to be concerned about. Okay, fourth one. Passages that are written to be funny don't often appear funny. And as a result, you'll read the entire thing asking yourself, what am I missing? And this is pretty common because the people who write these tests, the passages specifically, they tend not to have the same type of sense of humor as high schoolers, right? So if you're reading a passage and you are sort of feeling like there should be sort of some sort of tone to it, or you're confused by the tone of it, chances are the tone is humor and you're not getting it, right? You're not picking up on the humor of it, and that's not entirely your fault, right? It's just because you have different sensibilities. So if a passage feels like there should be something that you're not getting in it, chances are it's a humorous passage and you're not getting it, and answer choices will reflect that. Some answer choices will say funny or witty or wry, and you'll say, I didn't get that. Where did that answer come from? And that's because you're missing the tone. So that's a fourth reason passages can feel difficult. And the last is that it's a long passage, right? So in the passages, you'll see at least one or two long passages. That is, they take up at least 2 columns on the page. If you know that attention is going to be an issue with you, that is, if you know that by the time you're done with the passage, you'll forget what it said at the beginning, you need to break it up into smaller pieces and do what I suggested on the boring passages, and that is do a paragraph by paragraph summary. That way you'll have quick references, and again, you'll stay engaged, you won't forget as much. So those are 5 things that make passages difficult for students, and those are 5 pieces of advice. So let's dive right in, do the practice questions, and get better at addressing difficult passages.